Hello. I'm going to give you the evidence that will prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that you will live on happy and healthy after your body dies. I'm Dr. R. Craig Hogan, President of the Afterlife Research and Education Institute, author, co-author, or editor of 10 books containing the evidence we are spiritual beings who live on after we've left our bodies behind. The evidence is in these videos. I want you to listen to the voice of a husband and a wife having a normal conversation. The wife talks about her ring and a lock of hair that her husband has with him.
You have got my ring in your pocket?
Yes.
And also the lock of hair?
Yes, everything is with me.
All the various things associated with us both.
Yes.
There's nothing remarkable about the conversation, except that when they had it, the wife had been dead for 4 years. Surprising? You won't be surprised by the time you finish this video. The woman is Annie Nanji. She's speaking to her husband, Dr. Dinshaw Nanji. Dr. Nanji was a professor in the Department of Biochemistry at the University of Birmingham in the UK. The two were happily married until 1966, when Annie passed away from cancer. Dr. Nanji was devastated and wanted to find a way to connect with his Annie. 4 years after her passing, he went to a medium named Leslie Flint. Leslie Flint had the remarkable talent of having people now living in the life after this life speak through a voice box made of the fluid from his body called ectoplasm. Dr. Nanji sat in a room with Flint, and after a short time, he heard his wife, Annie, speaking, just as clearly as if she had been standing in the room with them. Here's another example. Annie comes unseen into Dr. Nanji's flat at night and taps to tell him she's there. He acknowledges it.
Because, I hear your tapping.
Good.
And I'm surprised at myself that I can hear it.
I always know when you hear.
Yes.
Because you always acknowledge it.
Yes, exactly.
And you always say, thank you, darling.
Yes, I know.
And I try again.
From 1970 to 1983, Dr. Nanji traveled twice a year to sit with Leslie Flint, with just the two of them in the room. Annie came through every time and spoke. Today we have over 24 of the full recordings, 45 minutes to an hour long, of Annie and Dr. Nanji talking casually about things happening in their lives. Imagine you're sitting in a room with 7 or 8 people and the lights go out. After a while, you hear someone calling your name, but it isn't any of the people sitting in the room calling. It's someone you love whose body has been dead for several months. This is what it actually sounded like when someone not present in the group of people named Nick called out to talk to his love sitting in the room, Sarah.
Can you tell us who you are?
It's Nick.
It's Nick.
Hello, Nick.
Hi, Nick.
Baby.
Yes,
Here's to
Sarah's
see
here.
Sarah. Darling, I'm here. Sarah, speak up to him.
Nick's body had been dead for several months. Sarah had to say her goodbyes at his funeral, yet here he was, speaking to her. He wasn't very good at using the voice box people in seances must use to communicate. His voice box was in a coffin somewhere. He had to use what spirit energy made available as a voice mechanism, into which he sent his thought words. He could only manage to make it speak in a whisper. But Sarah knew it was Nick.
Nick? Yeah, I can, darling. I love you, baby. I love you so much. I love you. Don't ever leave me, okay? I know you're with me.
As much time with you as I can, I'm always going to be there.
Okay, my baby, just stay close. I love you so much, and you know how grateful I am for you doing this.
You know all those things that you've bought.
Yeah,
They're gone, it was just lost.
yeah,
They were lost.
yeah.
Don't worry about them. I
Really?
knew you was there. I knew you was there.
Did you, darling? Was I enough for you? I just...
Listen to me, we haven't got long. Listen to me.
Okay, my baby.
Always remember,
Yeah.
I love you with all my heart.
Okay.
I told you that just before I left you.
I know.
I'll always be with you, always be with you.
Okay, my darling.
Promise me something.
Yes.
I want you to be happy.
I will for you. I will for you. I'll make the best of what I've got here. For you.
Some poor man could ever want. More than every man could ever want.
Okay, my baby, because you know you were worth it. You don't ever doubt how much I loved you and how much I will continue to love you. Don't ever doubt.
Now, I really my love for you.
Okay, my baby. Oh, I love you. I love you.
Nick's body had died, but he was very much alive. It was Nick, his personality, his love for Sarah, his knowledge of things she had done after his body died, and his heartfelt message that he would always love her, and assurance that they would be together in the future. The 7 or 8 other people all witnessed the events. It proved to Sarah that Nick was still alive. This recording is proof for us in the same way. Sarah and the group of people received no money for the recording. They had no reason to fake it. Our bodies will die, but we will never die. We will be able to spend time with our loved ones still living on earth. And if we can find a talented medium or materialization medium, we will be able to speak with our loved ones. Since we know now without doubt that people live on after their bodies die, it would be wonderful to hear their voice as proof they're alive and okay. In fact, we have the recordings. People are now recording the voices of loved ones living in the next life through electronic voice phenomena, or EVP. It's also called instrumental transcommunication, or ITC. Here's an example. The researcher records her question asking for a response about the background noise she's using to get recordings of people in the afterlife. When she plays the recording back, she hears her question, then an answer.
Say something to me in English to let me know I should use this.
I speak in English.
The child's voice wasn't heard in the room as the recording was being made. It was placed on the recording by the child in spirit. The researcher didn't hear the answer until she played back the recording with the question on it. In 2001, Sonia Rinaldi, a researcher in Brazil, began recording the voices of children whose bodies had died to give to their parents. The parents were overjoyed. Here's an example. Sonia asks whether the child in spirit would like to leave a message for her mother.
Would you like to leave a message to your mother?
Mommy, I can talk.
The voice on the recording could only have come from the child who's living healthy and happy in the next life. No one was in the room with Sonia as she asked her question. The child's response demonstrates that we and those who have gone on before us live on after we stop using the body. You probably have heard of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the Swiss-American psychiatrist who was an expert on death and dying. She was listed as one of the 100 most important thinkers of the 20th century by Time magazine in 1999. She received 20 honorary degrees and published 20 books on death and dying. She was included in the list of the foremost women of the 20th century. She is someone we can rely on to be truthful and not to have a hallucination. Yet she wrote in her book on life after death the description of the astonishing visit from a woman whose body had been dead for 2 years. It was a patient of hers named Mrs. Schwartz. This is a voiceover speaking the words Kubler-Ross wrote.
I was at a crossroad. I felt I needed to give up my work with dying patients. That day, I was determined to give notice and leave the hospital and the University of Chicago. It wasn't an easy decision. because I really love my patients. I walked out of my last seminar on death and dying towards the elevator. At that moment, a woman walked towards me. She had an incredible smile on her face, like she knew every thought I had. She said, "Dr. Ross, I'm only going to take 2 minutes of your time. If you don't mind, I'll walk you down to your office." It was the longest walk I have ever taken in my life. One part of me knew this was Mrs. Schwartz, a patient of mine who had died and been buried almost a year ago. But I'm a scientist, and I don't believe in ghosts and spooks. I did the most incredible reality testing I've ever done. I tried to touch her, because she looked kind of transparent in a waxy way. Not that you could see furniture behind her, but not quite real either. I know I touched her, and she had feeling to her. We came to my office and she opened the door. We went inside, and she said, "I had to come back for 2 reasons. Number 1, I wanted to thank you and Reverend Smith once more for what you have done for me. But the real reason why I had to come back is to tell you not to give up your work on death and dying. Not yet." I realized consciously that maybe indeed this was Mrs. Schwartz. But I thought nobody would ever believe me if I told this to anybody. They really would think I had flipped. So my scientist in me very shrewdly looked at her and said, "You know Reverend Smith would be thrilled if he would have a note from you. Would you terribly mind? You understand that the scientist in me needed proof. I needed a sheet of paper with anything written in her handwriting, and hopefully her signature." This woman knew my thoughts and knew I had no intention to ever give her note to Reverend Smith. However, she took a piece of paper and wrote a message and signed it with her name. Then, with the biggest smile of love and compassion and understanding, she said to me, "Are you satisfied now?" Once more, she said, "You cannot give up your work on death and dying. Not yet. The time is not right. We will help you. You will know when the time is right. Do you promise?" The last thing I said to her was, "I promise." And with that, she walked out. No sooner was the door closed, I had to go and see if she was real. I opened the door, and there was not a soul in that long hallway.
Mrs. Schwartz was alive, healthy, and articulate. She appeared in a body Dr. Kubler-Ross recognized immediately. Dr. Kubler-Ross was able to touch her. Mrs. Schwartz thanked Dr. Kubler-Ross for taking care of her, proving it was she who materialized. She knew what Dr. Kubler-Ross had been thinking and intending to do. All of that proved that Mrs. Schwartz continued to live after her body died and was still living when she met with Dr. Kubler-Ross. She did not die with the body, just as you can be assured you will not die when you leave your body behind. We ought to expect that since people live on after their bodies die, people who specialize in working with the mind, such as psychotherapists, would have had some contact with people living in the next life. That is, in fact, what has happened. Today, there are 3 therapy methods being used by psychotherapists that help people enter a state of mind in which they have an afterlife communication. The first of these is called an induced after-death communication, or IADC. The method was developed by Dr. Alan Botkin, a psychotherapist at the North Chicago Veterans Administration facility. He learned how to use a psychotherapy method called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing that is used with PTSD and trauma patients to help people have afterlife communications. The method is 76% successful. The client is put into a relaxed state and closes their eyes. The afterlife communication happens. The psychotherapist does nothing to influence what happens and learns about it only after the client opens their eyes and tells the psychotherapist about what happened. The therapy method and 84 cases are described in our book, Induced After-Death Communication, A New Therapy for Grief and Trauma. This is one example narrated from the book as related from a client named Jim who had a successful IADC procedure.
I was very close to Simon and his wife, Darlene. In my IADC with Dr. Botkin, I saw Simon and talked with him. I felt he was okay, but I was really hoping to have a message for Darlene. She was not doing well at all. Dr. Botkin took me into the IADC procedure again to have another after-death communication so I could ask Simon for a message for Darlene. But this time I only saw two hands, a broad, masculine hand over a feminine hand. I felt they were Simon's and Darlene's hands, but there was no message. I was really disappointed I didn't have a message for Darlene, but was really happy at the contact with Simon. After my session with Dr. Botkin, I went to Darlene's home. I told her about my communication with Simon I had while with Dr. Botkin. Then I said, "Darlene, I'm disappointed I didn't have a message to give you from Simon." I said, "All I saw was Simon's hand on top of your hand." She began to cry, smiling and nodding her head. She said to me,
"Last night I had a dream. It was so clear it didn't seem like a dream. I really felt Simon holding my hand. Jim, he did give you a message from him to me. He was saying that it really was him holding my hand last night."
Jim was put into a relaxed state in which the afterlife communication occurred all by itself, with no influence by the psychotherapist or by Jim. He was getting everything from Simon. The proof of that is that Simon showed Jim something Jim had no understanding of. It was a message for Darlene. Simon was alive and well, living in the life after this life. He was able to visit his wife Darlene and hold her hand so fully that she actually felt it. He then showed it to Jim so Jim could tell Darlene it really was him. Simon lives on, just as you and I will live on after our bodies die. We have consistent, verified evidence that people living on Earth are able to communicate mind to mind with their loved ones living in the life after this life. Such communication is now commonplace. We've developed a training program that teaches people how to go into a self-hypnotic state of mind in which they have an afterlife communication with their loved ones. The procedure is called a self-guided afterlife connection. The training is free, online, at selfguided.spiritualunderstanding.org. This is a narration of the report by a woman who had a wonderful self-guided afterlife connection with a girl whose body had been killed in an automobile accident. She has a remarkable validation that it was the daughter of a friend of hers.
Then I saw a young girl, a teenager. She had familiar features. The name Brenda came to me and I realized it's a friend of mine's daughter. She died in a rollover crash where she was pinned and asphyxiated. The kids with her were allegedly responsible for her being abandoned at the wreck. The feelings I got from her had nothing to do with that wreck or the people around her then. She hovered with me, morphing a bit so I saw her in different ages. I saw her exploring. I saw her as a student, studying. I don't know that she did that on Earth, but she is now that she's passed. I heard her say, "I love Mom. I miss Mom." I asked in my mind, how can you miss her? You are always with her. It was a misunderstanding. I saw some food item rolled. It looked like a lobster roll but with jalapenos. I was focused on it too much and it disappeared. I looked to the side and saw her as a little girl, rolling out dough, working on a red check tablecloth, working so hard. She was darling. Then I realized, oh, she misses doing this stuff with her mom. At least that's what I got from it. I saw her enjoying the weather, the fall, the leaves' colors. I saw her and felt her loving the ocean and tide. I could feel her sort of drinking it in. She showed me some other things she was liking about where she was. And her condition. Well, how do? I wrote Lauren, mother of Brenda, in the Afterlife Connection, and told her the first part of it and how confused I was with the roll-ups that had jalapeno in them. I kept thinking, what on earth? So I wrote Lauren, unsure of how much to tell her. I can never remember who is a believer and who isn't. Guess what? She writes back and says it makes sense to her. Yes, they made jalapeno roll-ups. What? I've never heard of such a thing. Look, if I ever thought I was making this stuff up, well, I completely believe now. Where the hell did jalapeno roll-ups come from?
The woman's vivid experience of the young girl matched her friend's daughter, even in the unusual creation of the jalapeno roll-ups. The experience validated that the young girl was alive, although her body had died, and that she was anxious to communicate. In a second narration of a report by someone who had a self-guided afterlife connection experience, the woman had events occur that she did not expect. The vivid detail was proof the encounter was not something she could have imagined.
I went to the same garden, my own, and again found what I did not expect. My Uncle Jim, who died about the same time as my father, was sitting in the seat my brother Dick had been in. Bob was my favorite uncle when I grew up. He used to take me for rides in his truck when he was working. I have not thought of him for some time. He began talking to me about the farm where I grew up. We walked out from the farmhouse and he began sharing about how it was when he grew up there. I had not thought of that much. Both he and my dad spent their childhood there. I turned to look at the ridge where I used to walk and daydream. Immediately he took both of us to the ridge. He said it was one of his favorite places too. Then he talked about how they dug out the white chalk rock there to make my grandma's flower beds. It was a revelation to me. I had always loved the raised round flower beds in the front yard, and I always loved the broken up place on the ridge, but I had never put two and two together. Then Bob took me up high to look down on the farm. He asked me if I would like to take care of a farm for my remaining years. I said I was a bit old to do that. He waited for me to answer. I said sure. It seemed and still seems a strange idea. We left it there, said goodbye and separated. Not what I expected. Just a chatty visit with someone I had not seen for some time. Different members of my family have been showing up. We were never an overtly affectionate bunch. All 3 sessions have seemed to convey a rather amused and affectionate attitude towards me. I have felt very much at home with them, always felt surprised at what transpires, and left wondering at them in a good way.
The woman was communicating with her loved ones whose bodies were dead. They were anxious to communicate with her. The attitudes of the people towards her were surprisingly loving, a testimony to the fact that she was having a real communication with them. They lived on after their bodies had died, just as we will live on. You will never die.